The dust blew west that morning, a fine ochre mist curling off the ground like breath from a dying man's mouth. Silas Reeve rode in with it, a solitary figure slouched in a cracked saddle, hat brim drawn low, clothes the color of forgotten earth. His horse, a sway-backed mare named Tether, limped on instinct more than will. They both had the look of something used up, stitched together by stubbornness alone. He came to Gallows Fork with coin in his boot heel and a rope of gilt coiled tight in his chest. He didn't speak to anyone when he hit the main street, didn't stop for whiskey, didn't nod at the preacher. He was a man not worth noticing, and the town obliged. The auction was already underway by the time he reached the square. A small knot of men circled the platform like buzzards. Sheriff Tumbler stood off to the side, arms crossed over his belly, watching the proceedings with a wet-lipped smirk. The banker, Mr. Colbrand read from a list, voice sharp and rehearsed. Everything was for sale now: land, wagons, old plows, bed frames with the linens still on them. Gallows Fork was a dying place, and this was the rattle. Silas leaned against a fence post, arms folded. He hadn't come for plows, he'd come for the last lot. The widow stepped onto the platform with her head bowed low. She wore a black dress that had seen too many seasons and not enough soap. Her hands were folded in front of her, tight as a noose. The girls followed, identical and ghost pale, each gripping the other's hand. Maybe 9 years old, maybe less. Their hair was straw blonde and tangled. Their dresses were faded blue, mismatched at the seams. One looked up briefly, and Silas caught her eyes, flat, unreadable, not a hint of child in them. Lot 72, Colbrand announced, eyes flicking over the paper. Widow named Ruth Malden and her twin daughters. No dowry, no property. Bank assumes medical debts. Package sale. Who'll start? A murmur ran through the crowd, half mockery, half hunger. Someone spat. $2, a voice offered, already chuckling. 3, another countered. Silas didn't speak until the murmur started to die. Then, quiet as a knife point sliding through cloth, he said, 10. Heads turned, Colbrand's brow lifted. $10, the banker asked, cash on hand. Silas dug into his coat, pulled out a folded bill. The last of what he'd scraped from selling his dead brother's watch. He walked it forward, handed it over, and didn't look at the crowd. The hammer dropped, and that was how Silas Reeve bought the widow and her twin girls. He led them away without ceremony, down the main road and toward the half-collapsed shack he'd been calling home for the last year. Ruth said nothing. The girls didn't cry. They didn't ask what he wanted from them. Silas didn't know how to answer if they had. They walked until the town vanished behind them, and only the wind was left, whispering the names of the long dead. The shack stood at the edge of burned prairie, leaning hard to its right like a drunk losing his balance. It had one window, no glass, just a square hole with a blanket nailed across it. The door hung on one hinge. Silas opened it with the side of his boot and let them in first. Inside, the air smelled of mice and damp rot. There was one cot, a stove with rust in its throat, and a table that looked gnawed. He'd cleared space on the floor, laid old quilts down. It wasn't fit for cattle, let alone a woman and children. The widow stepped in without hesitation. She looked once around the room, then dropped her satchel at her feet and set to work, folding the quilts smoother, brushing dirt from the corners with her sleeve. One of the twins, Silas still couldn't tell them apart, dragged a stool near the stove and sat like a crow settling on a branch. The other stood beside her mother, motionless. Silas unhitched Tether, watered her from a bucket of collected rain, then came inside and lit the stove with a twist of dried grass and a strike of flint. No one spoke. That night the wind howled through the boards. He gave them the cot. He slept by the door with his coat for a blanket and his rifle close at hand. He dreamed of nothing, but woke with the taste of blood in his mouth and didn't know why. The next day Ruth made stew from old beans and onion peel. She didn't ask where his money came from or what he expected. Instead, she pointed to the sagging fence beyond the field and said, "It needs mending." He didn't argue. He handed her a hammer and the bucket of bent nails, and they worked side by side through the cold morning. The twins followed them like shadows, neither playing nor whining. One knelt and held planks steady while the other gathered the scattered nails in an old tobacco tin. They didn't ask questions. They just watched everything. Silas began to notice small things, how Ruth never turned her back to a door, how the girls flinched not at thunder, but at silence, how their eyes darted in perfect sync when the wind changed direction. Once, when a hawk circled low over the field, one of the twins hissed a sound between her teeth and it veered away. He wasn't sure which of them it was. He began calling them red and blue for the scraps of ribbon they tied in their hair. They never corrected him. A week passed. One night he found Ruth by the stove sharpening the dull edge of a kitchen knife on a stone he hadn't seen her bring in. "They'll come for us," she said plainly, without looking up. Silas leaned against the doorframe, the chill crawling up his spine. Who? Men with oil on their boots, who wear smiles too long, who own paper that says we're not ours. He said nothing, just nodded. He'd known the kind. She stopped sharpening and looked at him then. Her eyes were gray, not the soft gray of river stone, but the cold iron color of chain. "I'm not afraid of dying," she said, "but I won't have them take the girls." Silas understood. The same way a man understands the sound of a wolf in the distance, low and certain and promising ruin. That night he sat awake while the wind rattled the nails in the roof. The twins slept curled against each other like twin embers. Ruth lay with the knife under her hand. Silas watched the door and thought of the coin he no longer had, the hunger in the eyes at the auction, and the men who looked at children like property. He thought maybe he'd bought more than he'd reckoned. He also thought maybe, just maybe, they weren't the ones who needed saving. Spring didn't come in Gallows Fork. It had to be fought for. The frost retreated slow, like a wounded animal, leaving behind a landscape half dead. The creek behind the shack unthawed just enough for water to trickle again, and Silas dug a narrow trench with his bare hands to guide it toward the field. He'd buried seed weeks earlier, more out of habit than hope. Ruth took to planting herbs she recognized from a time before sorrow. Tiny shoots in cracked tin cups, coaxed to life by her whisper and warmth. She never smiled, not with her mouth, but once he caught her humming, low and mournful, something like a hymn without a name. She stopped when she saw him and never did it again. The twins carved patterns in the dirt with sticks, symbols Silas didn't understand. Circles inside of squares, jagged trees with roots that forked backward. One night when a fox howled too close, they both sat bolt upright and whispered together in a language he couldn't place. The fox went quiet. Silas didn't ask. Weeks passed. The land softened. And then came the rider. It was late afternoon, sun bleeding low, when the dust kicked up along the ridge trail. A single man on a chestnut gelding, cutting a clean line toward the shack. Silas saw him first. From the way Ruth went still at the sink, he knew she'd heard the hoofbeats before he'd spoken. She wiped her hands and reached for the knife, then handed it to Blue without a word. The girl slid it beneath her apron and stood behind the door. Red vanished beneath the table. Silas stepped out front, rifle loose in his hand, mouth dry. The rider came slow, reins slack, posture casual. But his boots were polished and his coat bore no dust. He had the face of someone used to giving orders, and a smile that clung too long to his lips. "Even in, friend," he called, didn't mean to startle. "You didn't," Silas said flat. "Good, I'm just looking for someone. Widow Malden. Heard she might have come this way." Silas said nothing. The man let the silence hang, then, without prompting, dismounted. She and her brats left a place up north. Belonged to a man owed more than coin. Bank's only half of it. I've got papers here, deeds, claims, collection orders, all clean, all stamped. He patted his satchel like it meant something holy. I figure if she's here, it's best to sort this peaceably. I don't hold with violence. Silas saw the shape of a pistol under the man's coat. Brass handle, polished neat, not the weapon of someone unfamiliar with blood. She's not here, Silas said. The man looked past him toward the shack. Mind if I take a look? I do. The man's smile faltered just a flicker, then returned. Well, that's unfortunate. From the tree line, something moved. Another rider. Then two more, three shadows now, fanning out wide, trying not to look like they were closing in. Inside, the door creaked once. Blue, he figured, getting into position. The man in front of him adjusted his coat. Friend, he said, I think you understand the weight of what you're trying to interfere with. I understand enough, Silas replied. The man sighed almost kindly. You'll get one chance to walk away. No shame in it. She's not yours. Not really. Silas thought of the night Ruth sat by the stove sharpening steel. Thought of the twins, pale as chalk and silent as graves. Thought of the way Red touched the soil before planting and how nothing had died since. She is now, Silas said. The man nodded, slowly. Then he whistled. Everything happened fast. Shots rang out from the trees. Splinters from the porch post exploded near Silas's head. He dove sideways, rolled, came up firing. One of the riders screamed. Another didn't get the chance. Inside, the door burst open. Blue moved like smoke, knife in hand, blood already on her cheek from crawling under floorboards. She went for the rider's legs, slicing tendon. He screamed, dropped. Ruth followed, dragging Red behind her, all three vanishing into the woods without a backward glance. Silas took another shot, ducked low. His shoulder burned. The man on the ground writhed, reaching for his pistol. Silas kicked it away, brought the butt of the rifle down hard, once, twice, until he stopped moving. By the time it was over, the creek ran red. Silas leaned against the shack, breathing ragged, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. He didn't see Ruth for hours. When she returned, she was alone, hair loose, clothes torn at the hem, but her eyes were calm. They'll send more, she said. Silas nodded, wiping blood from his chin. Let them, he answered. That night they buried the bodies far from the house. No markers, no prayers, only dirt and silence and the long, slow turn of something dark rising between them. By midsummer, the ground held green again. Silas had never seen it so alive. Corn stalks rose tall and sure, beans coiled up hand-hewn poles like eager fingers. The fields bore more than he'd planted, fed by something deeper than soil or sweat. Ruth's herbs thrived near the roots of every row. She never explained why she moved them each week, only that she did it under moonlight and barefoot. The girls didn't speak often, but they worked with purpose. Red kept watch from the hill near dawn. Blue tracked prints in the woods. They weren't children in the usual sense. They were sentries, small, quiet sentries with eyes like ash and nails caked in earth. Silas began sleeping with both boots on. Once he asked Ruth what the girls had been before all this, before the auction, before the debts. They were born too early, she said. Or maybe too late. Either way, they came wrong, not weak, just different. The midwife tried to smother them with a pillow. Silas didn't speak, just poured her another cup of coffee. The shack had changed too. Ruth patched the roof with old canvas. She tied wildflowers over the lintel and braided sticks into a charm above the window. The stove burned steadier. The air no longer reeked of mildew, but something cleaner. Pine, perhaps, or sage. He still kept the rifle close. One night, while the girls slept in the loft they'd built from scrap lumber, Ruth came and stood beside Silas by the edge of the field. The stars were out, sharp and silver, cutting holes in the sky. You ever wonder, she asked, Why men like that carry paper and not knives, like words on a page can hurt more than a blade. He nodded, they can, if no one fights back. She turned toward him then, face lined with shadow. You think this place is safe? No. Then why stay? Silas didn't answer right away. He looked toward the creek, toward the tree line where 3 men had bled into moss and bark. Because it matters, he said finally. Because you do. Ruth watched him a long time, then touched his arm, light, brief, like testing warmth from a fire. The next day the sheriff came, not with a badge and a posse, but alone, horse foaming, eyes hollow. He didn't make it to the door, just collapsed in the dust, hand outstretched. Silas dragged him into the shade. The man stank of fear and sweat. His lips were blistered, his boots torn. Colbrand's dead, he gasped. Bank went up in flames. Men came from the east, not lawmen, worse. Silas looked at Ruth. She didn't move. The girls came out of the woods, quiet and alert. Who are they? Silas asked. The sheriff choked on his own spit. Don't know names. They ride gray horses. Don't blink. One of them's a woman, white hair like bone, eyes like, he didn't finish. He convulsed once, then stilled. Ruth knelt beside him, took something from his coat pocket, a folded map, blood-speckled. She studied it for a moment, then passed it to Silas. They're not just looking for me now, she said. He unfolded the map. Gallows Fork was circled in red, so were 3 other settlements, all burned. Why? He asked. She hesitated. Because I left. He looked at her, really looked, the gray eyes, the scars hidden by sleeves, the girls who whispered to birds and never wept. What were you? Ruth didn't answer. That night, Silas sat alone outside the shack, rifle across his knees, while Ruth marked symbols in the dirt with ash and water. The girls hummed in unison upstairs, a tune not fit for daylight. Wind bent the trees back like they were bowing. The next morning, tracks appeared down by the creek, hooves, 4 sets, deep, precise. They hadn't heard them arrive. But they were close now, watching, waiting. The gray riders came at dusk, just as the sun bled out behind the hills. No sound announced them, no dust. They moved like ghosts in the tall grass, 4 figures on pale horses, faces shadowed beneath broad-brimmed hats. Even their animals seemed unnatural, silent, unshod, eyes too dark. Silas spotted them first from the porch. He didn't call out. He knew Ruth was already watching, knew the girls would have marked their scent an hour before. He just stood there, hands loose by his sides, rifle untouched for now. The lead rider was the woman. Hair white as limewash, braided down her back. Her face bore no age, only stillness. The men behind her wore coats without buttons, vests without thread. Their boots were bone-colored and clean. No trail of them existed behind the hooves, nothing broken, nothing bent. The woman dismounted without speaking. She looked past Silas toward the shack, then toward the woods. Her eyes didn't reflect light, they drank it. You've taken in the cast-offs, she said. Her voice was not unkind. It was hollow, like wind passing through dead trees. Silas didn't answer. She stole from us, the woman continued. Not coin, not land, blood, promise, and she took what was given form and made it human. Now Ruth stepped into view. Barefoot, hair unbound, eyes unreadable. I returned what you ruined, she said. The woman turned toward her, tilting her head slightly. You broke the binding, that comes with a price. You didn't earn them, Ruth said. You bred them for power. Silas's eyes shifted between them. The men behind the white-haired woman remained still, hands by their sides. Not reaching, not yet, the woman smiled. We didn't breed them, we shaped them. They were born from pain, same as you. Ruth stepped forward. You want them back. They are unfinished. They are mine. Now the woman looked to Silas. And you think you found a cause, that rifle won't save you. Silas nodded once, I know. But I'm not aiming to be saved. The woman's eyes narrowed just a sliver. We warned you, she said. Then all four of them moved. They didn't draw weapons. They simply crossed the space with inhuman speed, cloaks billowing like wings. But Silas was ready. He fired once, hit nothing. The bullet tore bark from a tree 10 feet away. He turned and fired again. One of the men staggered but didn't fall. Ruth began to speak, not English, not anything Silas recognized. Her voice rose, thick with rage and something older than speech. The ground cracked. Red and blue came from the side, one from the roof, the other from beneath the porch. Red struck first, blade flashing, slicing the tendon of a gray horse. Blue flung dust into the eyes of the second man, who screamed as if it burned. Then came the wind. It tore through the clearing, lifting ash and leaves and sparks from the fire pit. The white-haired woman opened her arms as if welcoming it, but it turned against her. The sigils Ruth had carved the night before glowed faintly in the earth. The woman stumbled. Her riders faltered. Ruth raised her hands, palms out. Her voice dropped low. The ground beneath the riders churned like boiling water. "Leave," she said. The woman looked at her, no more smiles. "You can't keep them hidden forever." Ruth stepped closer. "I'm not hiding them. I'm showing them what it means to be free." The woman spat into the dirt. It smoked. Then she turned. With a whistle, the riders mounted again, even the injured one, and disappeared into the tree line as suddenly as they'd come. The silence afterward was complete. Silas let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd held. Ruth sank to her knees. The girls didn't speak. They just knelt beside her, each holding one of her hands. Night crept in. No one slept. The next morning, Silas found hoofprints at the edge of the field, but only leading away. He knew they'd be back, but now he also knew what Ruth had taken, what the girls were, and what he had stepped into. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were standing their ground. Autumn arrived sharp-edged and early. The leaves turned copper and died fast, curling inward like secrets. The wind that came down from the ridgeline no longer carried dust or pollen, it carried scent. Smoke, wet leather, iron. The white-haired woman hadn't returned, not yet, but Ruth said it wasn't over. "They've gone deeper now," she told Silas. "Into older places. They'll come back changed." He didn't ask what that meant. He focused on the land, repaired the fence again, dug a deeper well by hand, hunted game farther than before. It felt like preparing for siege. Like waiting for something too big to see. Ruth spent her nights carving, not words, shapes. She etched them into bone, wood, stone, hung them in the eaves, buried them at the gate. The twins collected odd things, bird skulls. Strips of black cloth, rusted hinges. They never said why, they didn't have to. One morning, Red brought back a rabbit, not killed, paralyzed. She laid it at Silas's feet without a mark on it. "Show me," she said. He hesitated. "Show me how to end it." So he did, clean and quick, the way his father taught him. Her hands didn't tremble. That night he asked Ruth, "Do they feel anything?" She looked toward the loft where the girls slept. "More than most," she said. The first frost came sudden and thick, covered the field like sugar on a coffin lid. The herbs died, the beans withered, even the corn cracked under its own weight. Nothing fought back. Ruth stood barefoot in the garden, eyes closed, hands at her sides. "It's a sign," she said. "Something gone wrong in the places beneath." Silas didn't pretend to understand. He just cleaned his rifle again and watched the tree line. Days passed. Nights lengthened, then came the scream. It tore through the dark like a scythe, waking every bird for miles. Not human, not beast, something else. The girls sat up at once, not frightened, alert. "They've opened a door," Ruth said. At dawn, they found a trail, blood and ash and hoof marks circling the field. Something had walked the perimeter but hadn't entered, a warning or a promise. That day, Silas found Ruth packing, not clothes, not food, objects. Talismanic, strange, wrapped in cloth or tied with thread. One looked like a jawbone etched with teeth not its own. "We need to go," she said. "Not far, just up the bluff." "The cabin." "No," she said, "farther. Where the old chapel burned." Silas remembered it, a ruin 30 miles north, nothing left but black stones and a collapsed bell. "There's something there." "There's silence there," she said, "and silence is the only thing they fear." So they left. They packed what they could carry: rope, food, the rifle. The girls walked without speaking, each holding one of Ruth's hands. Silas took the rear, watching the trail close behind them like a wound. They reached the chapel ruins by nightfall. The wind there was sharper, thinner. It whistled through broken stones like breath through cracked teeth. The place felt hollow, dead but not quiet. Ruth laid her objects out in a circle. The girls sat in the center. Silas stood guard. "What happens now?" he asked. She looked at him. "They come." He didn't ask why or how, because now he could feel it too, in the marrow. Something had already begun. The wind stopped, not slowed, stopped. As if the air itself had been pulled from the lungs of the land. Even the crickets ceased their cry. The silence wasn't peace, it was pause, expectation. The sky above the chapel turned black without warning. Not the black of night, but of deep water, of closed eyes in a drowning dream. Stars blinked out, one by one, until only the circle remained, Ruth's circle of relics, lit faintly by the red pulse of something beneath the earth. The twins sat within it, knees touching, hands clasped. They did not blink, did not breathe. Ruth stood on the edge of the stones, arms raised. She was chanting again, not language, not sound exactly, but vibration, a call that made the ruins tremble. Silas stood outside the circle, rifle across his chest, jaw clenched tight. There was no direction to the threat. It was all around. It was nowhere. Then the riders came, not 4, not this time. There were 9. Their horses didn't move. They slid, as if the land yielded beneath them like water under a knife. Their cloaks whipped with no wind. Their faces were wrong, some too smooth, some too stretched, all bearing the imprint of humanity like a poor carving. And behind them, walking barefoot across the stones, came the white-haired woman. But she was no longer a woman. Her mouth was gone. Her eyes shone like glass full of oil. Her limbs moved like broken hinges. And her voice came from everywhere at once. "Give them back." Ruth didn't stop chanting. The riders dismounted, not with grace. They folded, collapsed, uncoiled like creatures returning to an old shape. One stepped forward, then another. Silas fired. The shot echoed like thunder, but the rider caught it midair. Not with a hand, with absence. The bullet vanished, no mark, no sound. Silas fired again, same result. Then red rose. She did not speak. She pointed. The air buckled. A soundless ripple, like a heat shimmer through blood. One rider convulsed and dropped, limbs twisted backward. Another screamed with a mouth not its own and split down the middle like wet bark. Blue stood. She opened her mouth and out came something not meant for this place. Not a sound, a shape, a pressure. The stones cracked. The remaining riders turned, but there was nowhere to flee. Ruth's circle held. The white-haired woman stepped forward, feet never touching ground. Her hands rose, claws now, or roots, or wires. Silas didn't wait. He dropped the rifle and stepped into the circle. Pain hit him like a wall. His head burned. His veins lit like fire, but he reached the twins, put a hand on each of their shoulders. "I'm here," he said. "Whatever this is, I'm with you." Their eyes opened, both at once, and something ancient opened with them. It came not from the sky or the ground, but from inside. The circle exploded with light, not white, not red, but memory, raw, endless memory, screams and lullabies, chains and fire, a mother's grief, a child's promise. The sound of breath held too long, the riders vanished. The woman screamed, or what remained of her did, her voice tearing the air as she unraveled into smoke and bone and teeth. Then silence, true silence, the kind Ruth had spoken of. Not absence, but peace. The girls collapsed into Silas's arms. Ruth fell to her knees. Blood ran from her nose. He knelt beside her, shaking. "It's done," she whispered. Silas looked at the twins. Their eyes fluttered shut. They were just girls again. Breathing, sleeping. "You sure?" he asked. Ruth gave the ghost of a smile. "No." They stayed the night in the chapel ruins. The stars came back slowly, like wounds closing. By morning, the frost had lifted. The grass below the stones turned green. They walked home the long way, through woods that felt different now, emptied but not hollow. Back at the shack, the wind had shifted. It no longer whispered threats. It carried a warning for others that this place was watched. That someone had stood here and said no. That a man once bought a widow and her children for $10, thinking he was saving them, and found, in the end, they were the ones who'd saved him.